Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast shorts. There's no co-host on these shorts episodes. These are now around 2 to 4 minute, sometimes as long as 6 to 10 minute observations, ideas, thoughts, or rants about the literature, philosophy, psychology, and even the theology of leadership. Because listening to me talk about leadership for now around 2 to 4 minutes is still better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. Even that business book your coworker won't stop raving about because it quote-unquote changed their life, but you can't see any difference in their leadership behavior. So how good could that author be? 3 random ideas for leaders that have occurred to me on the cusp of the most recent U.S. election cycle finally winding its way to a close. In the era of messaging to an audience with the audio form of blogging, podcasting. You know, that thing you're listening to right now. It occurs to me that if you are a political candidate or a leader, let's make it broad and actually focus on leadership. If you're a leader and you want to change history, you need to actively, in this era, lead against the dominant narrative of wherever you may happen to be standing. Whether that's economics, international relations, politics, business, nonprofits, or even your own family. Leadership these days is leading against the dominant narrative, not leading with the dominant narrative. The second thought that occurs to me is that the problem with conventional wisdom, and I'm not the first person to say this, is that it is, well, conventional, and it's not wisdom. Look, the crowds don't really know anything, and particularly in an era where everyone in the crowd has their own device and can broadcast to the world, but doesn't think of themselves as a broadcaster. This idea of conventionally held wisdom or commonly held knowledge is less relevant now than ever before. Every man is a king with an iPhone, even more so than the kings who came before us, who only had printing presses. If you're going to leading against conventional wisdom, or even trying to figure out what that wisdom may happen to be, is going to be incredibly difficult. Unless, of course, you've decided that the ground you're going to lead from is the ground of social media. In which case, well, good luck. Speaking of leading against the will of the crowd, politicos, politicians, and policy wonks, flim-flam men and women, let's not be gender biased, all in our modern era, tend to take the temperature of the crowd and then tend to lead from that point. This is the point of the endless polling in the election cycle that we are endlessly buffeted with. Taking the temperature works beautifully in an era of mass media, in an era of fat heads. But we currently live in the era of the long tail. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of bumps on that tail, but the further out you go, just in the United States alone, with all 330 million of our bumptious, fractious people, well, the further out you go. And so, taking the temperature of the crowd doesn't really tell you anything as a leader, particularly as a leader in the era of narrow casting media, like podcasting. So, if you want to be a leader, and if you want to change history, lead against the dominant narrative, defy conventional wisdom, and ignore the crowd. They're not clapping for you anyway. And well, that's it for me. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.